Hello, and welcome to the Eugene Real Estate Podcast. I am your host, Vince Casey. This is the first podcast devoted entirely to the Eugene real estate market, where every month we bring on local experts to discuss current trends to help us navigate the ever-changing landscape that is real estate. The Eugene Real Estate Podcast is now sponsored by House to Home Construction. House to Home Construction. Love where you live. This month's guest is Dustin Vollstedt. Dustin quickly became a top producer early in his career. He then joined forces with Freeman Corbin to create the Corbin Vollstedt Group, where they have collaborated to create Deal Seal, an app that helps agents track sales goals and client opportunities, and the Greenlight Success Platform, a program that helps agents streamline their business with proven marketing and coaching strategies. In addition to being a realtor, Dustin is also a real estate developer. He and his brother Garrett started Base Builders, a company that offers a comprehensive approach to real estate investment and development in Lane County. Dustin, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Vince. Super excited.
Yeah, me too. So Dustin, I know you're a third generation realtor that does a ton of volume every year. We've discussed in past shows how rising rates have created some setbacks for potential buyers. But with every setback also comes an opportunity. What opportunities are you seeing in the market right now?
Yeah, opportunity, that's a big part of it. And really, I try to look at that when there are these big shifts in the market. So if you go back, just quick example, 2019, a lot of people think about just these historically low rates. But I think what they forget was there was a multiple month period where the market pretty much came to a halt at that time when COVID first started and these rates had really dropped, but people weren't active on the market. And so when we have these shifts, that's where I'm looking for opportunities that are going on right now. And so now looking at it, we have these rates that are much higher, but at the same time, when I look at the factors in this market locally in Lane County, we still have both limited inventory and we have the situation where you have sellers who essentially have golden handcuffs. You know, if they want to move, they have this historically low rate, so they don't have a ton of options. So I see the opportunity that from a buyer's perspective is there's insulation in the market. And yet though there is this shifting mindset of becoming what feels like more of a buyer's market where not too long ago, 6 months ago, it was almost every property had multiple offers on it, some of which you maybe had to fully remove your contingencies to purchase that property. And now we have this shift where, yeah, rates are higher, but you may be able to go into a transaction and get it at a lower price point. You may be able to get a full inspection period on it and ask for repairs off. And then so I look at what are just the fundamentals of this and the literal points of this and the numbers. And so if I think, okay, this is a payment I, as a buyer, feel comfortable with, then great, because I'm able to take advantage of other opportunities in this shift in the market and not have to be at that crazy competition. If you look at it from the perspective of, yeah, interest rates are approaching or at 8%, for example. But then you look at 6 months ago, maybe you had to otherwise pay $25,000 to $50,000 over asking price on that property. Then you just do the math. Okay, which one is the lesser of two evils in that situation? And it is really case by case. You're still seeing properties that will get multiple offers, but it is nothing like what it was.
Yeah, absolutely. I know whenever I had Tiffany Matthews on, she said that the luxury market is actually still pretty hopping. And everybody knows that that 300 to 400 range is always going to be hot because we're getting those first time buyers that are finally getting to have their foothold in the market and make an offer. And like you said, get some of those closing costs covered, maybe get some repairs done, and just feeling like that scramble and being rejected over and over. Maybe some of that is in the past now. So in addition to being a realtor, you're also an investor that flips houses, which is primarily why I invited you on the show today. Some of my main clients are investors also. So I think between the two of us, we can tackle this topic and help the listeners get some perspective on what it takes to flip a house in Lane County. So my first question is going to be, how hard is it to find a property that pencils in Eugene? That finding something that you can buy at a decent rate, and then with the ARV, that it pencils out well where you can make a profit off it. I know you've done this quite a bit. So how hard is it to locate that property?
It's very difficult. And you look again, going back just the fundamentals of where we are. I think it's $1 Million Offers. There's a book I'm reading right now, and it really resonated where he says it's very important to know the market that you're in. The market that we are in, we have an area where we have a lot of restrictions on building. And you've had some really good guests on here who have really dove into the details around those in Lane County. Love your podcasts and listening to those. And so part of it, just to kind of go back over them, was we have really tight urban growth boundary restrictions. We have new construction is just very difficult to do. The fact that land's expensive and labor is expensive. And so because of that, we don't have this overabundance of inventory. We also live in an area we're fortunate to have the Pacific Northwest, high recreation area that a lot of people want to be in. And so because of that, we just don't see this abundance of what is available in terms of inventory. And when it does come available, or when we find it, it's really hard because the owner of that property, and this almost goes with every seller, they think their property is just worth a lot more than it is in that state. When it needs a lot of work, we're not in a place where labor is cheap, where material is cheap. And so when you do find these projects, it's really difficult to get past when you look at what the actual costs are going to be to not only acquire that property, but then fix up that property, sell that property with the overhead there. And then all of a sudden you look at the tax consequence of that property too. So it is very difficult to find properties here. Personally, we get pretty much all of our properties off market, and even those, we have a difficult time often making the numbers work.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. Inflation hasn't been very kind to a lot of the flippers out there. And back about 2 years ago, if you sold a property, there's a good chance, like you said in the beginning, you're going to sell $50,000 over asking with competing bids.
Yep.
Now there's a chance, especially in the softer part of the market, that it might live on the market for 5 to 6 months and you're 40 or 50K under what you thought you were going to sell it for.
Mm-hmm.
So really want to go pick those properties with open eyes and talk to a lot of different people that kind of know the flip market. Talk to a guy like Dustin or Matt Powell that we had on earlier. Those guys have been around the block, and it helps to get an expert's opinion for sure. Now I used the term pencil, and I realize that we may be using some terminology that average listeners may not be used to. So in order for the property to pencil, you take the purchase price of the property and tack on the renovation expenses like you were talking about, holding costs like taxes, water and electric. If you're using private money, you're definitely having a monthly payment and paying about 10 to 12% on that. So those can really add up pretty quick if your project gets stuck in the mud. So you take kind of that whole ballpark, including your realtor fees. If you're not a realtor like yourself, people tend to leave those out. You are paying 6% whenever you sell the property as well. So you want to tack that into your overall number, and that's sort of called your spread.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you usually get a good after renovation value to make sure you're kind of in a safe ballpark, especially now that our market's a little bit more unpredictable?
Yeah, so that one is following the proper calculations and templates. And in terms of resources for that, there are a lot of good templates out there. You go on Bigger Pockets. If there's investors you like to follow, they've made these templates, and sometimes they're free. Sometimes you pay $10 to get one of these templates to be able to do these calculations to give you a good idea. You run those, but with flipping, as you know, there's just various levels of risks involved. You don't know when you open up that wall what issues you're going to run into. And so that is a big part of it in consideration when people do get into this industry. You have to be really careful about, because you have the risks involved with the property and the structural aspect itself, but then also you have the risk of when you go to sell that property, what's the market like? We have made money on these projects, but we have also lost a lot of money, and we've been heavily insulated, and we did the calculations. And so that is just essentially a risk you have to weigh when you get involved in this industry. And you made a really good point. Something you said was it's almost kind of like where can you create or where can you create leverage to where you can insulate yourself. So my brother and I have our business together. We started about 7 years ago, and we, from the beginning, knew that we'd have to have this compatible relationship. And what I mean by that is he's able to create leverage for the partnership because he's the contractor. I'm able to create leverage because I'm the realtor. It could be somebody else, like a client that we have, for example, if they're able to do the work themselves. That's a really big one, right? If you have a contractor, somebody who's skilled, that's a huge one right now because labor is very expensive to do. So in these situations where it's really where can you create leverage in that situation to help try to insulate yourself, that's the best, safest way to go. In all reality, if you want to buy something and you want to sub everything out and you're going to be paying a bunch of overhead, it's going to be that much more difficult by comparison. Another way for the people looking to get into this to try to insulate is expectations. If you're buying a property as your personal residence and you're able to fix it up as you go and you live there for a couple years and you sell it and you don't have the capital gains expenditure, that's a really good way to go about it in our market, especially if you get the property right, because you're able to make improvements as you go along and as you need, and then not having to pay that capital gains, which if you're a flipper and that's not your primary residence, it's a big capital gains consequence that you have to pay. So yeah, I would say being able to just, where can you create leverage? Where can you create insulation?
Yeah, that's great advice. If you are a first-time flipper, especially, I would highly suggest you find a property that you could maybe see yourself living in for 2 to 5 years and make those improvements as you go. Earn that appreciation along with it, and then make the sale after all those rental projects have been completed. I've seen a few families do that and been quite successful at it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you mentioned that you get most of your properties offline or off market. Are you looking at pre-foreclosure reports, or are you making relationships with wholesalers? What's your main method of acquiring off-market properties?
So for that, as I mentioned, my brother and I have had this company for about 7 years. We're from the area. I work as a realtor. And so that has helped just create more opportunities. The specific parts of that, I would say some of our, a lot of it is the relationships we've built with our subs, with our vendors. And we really work to promote to find out what is the type of business they want to have. And we are working more and more to be intentional about letting them know what type of business we need and are looking for too in projects. And so that's been a way for us to get business. The other part is that we have literally driven around. This took us about 4 years to do. Drove around and looked at distressed properties, like little, and just made note on that. You know, they have apps out there like Deal Machine. They have different apps. And where we've created opportunity is we've literally just been willing to grind it out longer than most. You know, it's just like 4 years is a long time to be building a set of data that you can then try to work without having any type of guarantee to go with it. So for my brother and I, this is another business that we have. We structure in a way like this to where we can do that. We have other ways of forming and generating income to where we personally don't have to solely depend on this other business. So we can make those more long-term investments to be able to find these distressed properties.
Oh, nice. You rocked the Deal Machine, huh?
Rock the Deal Machine. Yeah. When I started, I literally went on Bigger Pockets and just read article after article. And what I did was I found out a way to where because they didn't have Deal Machine at the time. And so I found a way to use Evernote. You'd put your notes into Evernote, and then you would use that Zapier program. And then it would take the notes from Evernote and zap it over to a Excel spreadsheet on Google. Like that's what I had to go through. And like when I first started, it was a notepad, literally just writing down properties, spending hours driving around. And then I had to do that. And then Deal Machine came around, and that's been way more helpful, obviously, just because it's an application designed for doing that.
Yeah, I've spent one winter doing the deal machine thing pretty thoroughly. I feel like I drove at least every street of Lane County once.
Hmm.
Could be exaggerating a little bit, but I would say from all that time and energy that I spent, I'm nursing still one lead off of it, but I have not closed like a solid deal. So even whenever you put in the work, even whenever you send out mailers as somebody that's wholesaling or start cold calling, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to find that perfect property. And a lot of times, like you said, people will call you and say, "Yeah, I want to sell my house and I want to sell it for 500,000." And you're like, "Okay, well, this house would pencil at 350. Thank you for your time."
Hmm. Hmm. 100%.
So it's a lot of hurry up and wait in this industry, and a lot of times the people that are going to sell to you are waiting for that very last second chance moment where foreclosure is going to take over, and they're not really going to talk to you or give you the time of day until their house is actually being taken away.
Yeah.
So that is a tough a tough road to climb for sure. So people that are trying to prospect out there just realize just because you're prospecting doesn't necessarily mean you're gonna find that right house right off the bat. But I think most of the success that I've seen is just people knowing that, hey, I'm looking for a flip. I'm looking for distressed properties. As a realtor, whenever you get that reputation, there's a lot of people that start finding listings that maybe they're a little too rough for the market, or maybe there's a health situation where it'd make more sense if they could get a decent offer to go ahead and sell it off market. Has been one of the biggest tools. Also, I have chased the pre foreclosure report in the very beginning and had limited but some success there because those are the people that are like, hey, I'm ready to have a conversation. Um, so, how often do you have to say no when you're touring a prospective property? Is it pretty often?
I would say it's less than the average. And the reason is because we invested a ton of time up front to really narrow down our kind of inventory and the model that we're going after. So, yeah, you do still say no and you get shut down a ton. So I would say still like 70+% of the time, it's not going to work out. And that's even with a pretty heavily refined list that we have. And part of that too is they could have motivation, but then the numbers just aren't realistic with what we're doing. And then sometimes too is you go into it, you're really excited because they're motivated and you're like, the numbers work for me. This is great. And then you go to check it out, you get it in escrow and they have so many liens or so many other expenses on the property they didn't know about that it doesn't work. You can't, there's literally not enough equity in that property to make it pencil.
Yeah, that's a great segue into talking more about spread because I used to have a number down pretty well about 2 years ago. If you had 100K spread on a property, that was a deal.
Mm.
And now we're talking about obviously like an average size, maybe 3 bedroom, 2 bath home. But I found an off market deal that had a spread of about 130 grand. And I showed it to 4 different investors and they all passed on it and said it
Mhm.
didn't pencil anymore. Now, obviously, that's due to inflation, but is there like a magic number out there now? Obviously, depends a lot on the flip. If it has foundation issues, if it needs a new roof, if it needs new siding. But is there a number out there where you feel comfortable? No?
It's really case by case and what needs to be done on that project. Where it's sometimes you'll hear flippers say they need to make a certain percent on a project. For us, that is not the case. What we've really narrowed it down to is what is the time we have invested in that project, and then also what is the risk tolerance we have for this project. Where we have shifted to is because you mentioned before is we've done some infill new construction. Doesn't work for us. We just don't have a scaled model with it. We can't be leveraged in a good way. And so we've gone more so into projects. What are something we can try to turn around faster because of the adjusting market? And so that's where we really focus on rather than a percentage and such. We look at how much time we have invested into it. Technically, that is a riskier position because you're not allowing yourself that full spread to do. And so it's just a risk that at this stage we feel comfortable with, but it's something that we have to really watch. Because yeah, your project you go into, there's pretty much nothing that is less than 50K to work on. Unless again, if you're the one that's doing all the work and you have the skill set to do that, that can change that scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you personally look for in a flip whenever you're trying to flip a residential property?
So look for when we're going to analyze it, we want to look at kind of on the different tiers. Is this something that's cosmetic? Is this something that has structural issues? Is it something that has a roof? Typically, if it's structural and those bigger ticket items, we pretty much just walk away because we'll always put offer out there but the seller, they just don't see how they don't understand how much that costs and how intensive that is, and that's a very high risk situation. So we'll tier it to what is the potential risk that we are taking on in this project, and part of that comes down to location. And you think that this is a slam dunk property, it's gorgeous, but if it's not in the right school district, if it's not central, you're definitely going to have a variable in how much you're going to get on the resale of that property.
So you said you walk away from flips that have foundation issues. Is that every time, or do you have a rule on that?
Yeah, on that part of it comes down to what's the location you're in. I've seen in Springfield properties that have a good soil base, bedrock, and they're compacted and they don't fluctuate a lot. And then maybe they have a cracked foundation. We're not so worried about that. And again, that's going to be case by case. Like we get into the crawl space, we have a look. But if you're in an area that has more clay-based soils, like those are going to be problems that you're going to have unless it's been professionally addressed. So that's something where we more so gauge because we're from this area. We just know more of the geography to look about.
Gotcha. Yeah, I've been inside a few of your flips. One that really sticks out was Eleanor. That was a beautiful property, and I was definitely impressed with your finishes. Who does your finishes at Base Builders?
Got to credit that to my brother. It's funny
Okay.
you say Eleanor because that's one property I think about. I'm like, man, I wish I would have bought that house and just stayed. And because it would have been good time in the market, and it's just a beautiful property. My brother Garrett, he is the one that does the vast majority of the design picking and the finishes. One thing that we'll go over in our partnership is looking at items of, okay, is this the highest and best functionality for this property? And also, is it something that's going to help maximize resale value? And if it maximizes resale value, that's a good thing because that means it's addressing to the majority populace for something like that. So an example is, just to give a quick plug here, we've got our listing on Kinsley and 1050 Kinsley. And that property is, for what it is like such a good deal for whoever ends up buying it. And part of that was it has these two primary suite options. And we were thinking about at one end, we're like, well, we could frame out this section and enclose it and make two technical primaries. But what we did was we kept the hallway open and we had it framed on the interior. So if somebody wanted to, it's nice and open now in case you have family and guests when they're over can use the bathroom. But if somebody wanted to, all they'd have to do is basically buy a door with a frame, plug it in, and you have two separate primaries. So that's just a good example of things that we look at of how can we make this as most functional as possible for the majority to maximize that resale value and just usability for whoever's going to be purchasing the property.
Yeah. Do you typically look for high-end flips, or are you kind of all over the market right now?
We're all over the market. Just it's wherever we feel comfortable. With high end, you are depending on where you are, depending on what price you get, but in a way you're more exposed. And if it's a high end that's mid-century modern, super great location, like that's likely going to sell pretty fast. But you're also entering into a price range where you just are exposing yourself more really on how much capital you're having to put into a property. So it is really case by case. Right now, we're looking more at things of can we turn them faster? Because logistically, it just makes more sense.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. So speaking of finishes, are there any colors or trends that have kind of caught your attention that y'all try to put into your work?
For me personally, this is credit to my mom. what I like on my personal residence, my wife and I, is we will do on interiors alabaster on the body, and then we'll do something like a pure white or true white on the trim. And it's really funny because with paints, and I've learned this through trial and error, is you just have your different tones. You're going to have brown tones, you're going to have blue tones. And so you want to be really careful with how you mix that with even your furniture. If you have something that is a white with a yellow tone, and then all of a sudden you have yellow pillows on your couch and a yellow blanket, like it is going to pop out way more yellow than what you first expect. I really like alabaster because it has a light cream tone, which is pretty neutral to it. And when you first apply it to the wall by itself, it's just going to look like white. But then all of a sudden you do a lighter color like a true or pure white, which don't have those tones in them. All of a sudden you're like, whoa, this wall has a cream to it. And so ones like that are neutral but still have a little bit of character to them, we really like those. With the base projects, we've liked Eider White. We've liked these ones that have like a softer gray tone, sometimes blues. And those ones that have a little bit more like kind of, they feel modern but also earthy as well, which really fits the Pacific Northwest. So we definitely like those colors.
Are you a Sherwin-Williams guy, or do you have a preferred paint?
Sherwin-Williams.
Yep.
Done both, like both, but Sherwin-Williams.
Yeah, I think everybody that I've worked with has been Sherwin-Williams, and yeah, it's been fun to watch the new colors come about. And each house seems like it wants to be a certain color, and it usually is like, are we going to go blue tones here? Are we going to stay grays and whites, or is there going to be a little bit more taupe to this project? I usually find somewhere in the middle, because you want to be neutral enough to where you're not cutting off any of your buyers, but you also want it to be original enough where they think, oh, this person really thought this through and really put their time and energy into it.
Yeah. So with that, where I made a major screw up was on my personal residence that we had on Walnut. We picked this color. It was just a total rookie move on my part. We picked this color and I was in a rush. And so I did the test coat in the shaded side. And I did about 3 colors, and I did it on about a 1x1 square. And I was like, this looks great. And so I had and it's basically like a 3-story house. And so was in a rush told the painter, go for it. And then they got 3/4 of the way done with the exterior of the house. And I get a phone call, and basically they're like, you should really get over here and look at this. And it looked fine in the shade, but when I came over, it was Smurf blue in the sun, like almost like a neon Smurf blue.
Oh no.
And the world trials were going on at the time. And the painters said that not only were the neighbors coming over and basically politely saying like, you're not going to paint it that color, are you? Even though it's already painted that color. There were participants and fans from the world trials who were walking by to go to the event, and they were even saying that too, like, oh, that's a real bright color you have there. So we ended up repainting the whole exterior of the house, and I can't remember that blue, but the blue we ended up going with was Sea Serpent blue, which love that color. My wife picked that color, and it has this real nice navy traditional color to it. And this was a true craftsman house, but it also has a little bit of a pop as well. And so that color we were super happy with, but just never want to make that mistake again. The best way, I was talking to a really very, I guess, prominent, well-known architect in Lane County, and he had a really good suggestion. He said, what you want to do is you want to paint about a 4x4 square on the shaded side, and you want to do it on the sunny side. And especially when you're doing the exterior body of the house. And that's going to give you a really good idea. And then you can also do it next to the trim of what you want your trim color to be, because your trim color is going to differentiate what that body looks like at the end of it. And for someone like myself, like I want to keep moving with things, I get very anxious and stressed out about paint colors. So when we find something we really like, we try to stick to that, or we'll really at this stage do the tests to make sure it's a color that's gonna work.
Yeah, absolutely. I flipped houses with a guy named Bob Bash, and we learned that lesson the hard way as well. So anytime we were putting color on the walls or the exterior, just go ahead and paint a little patch, let it dry, come check it out.
Big patch.
Yeah. Yeah, it tastes about $5 to get one of those paint samples. So I remember one color that we kind of fell in love with, especially for some of the more country properties that we did. We were using a dovetail gray along with an urban bronze for the
Mm,
trim, and
mm.
every single time we did that, it seemed to really pop. I know that was a few years ago, so I'm not sure if those colors are still trending or not. But
They are. Those are two. Those are a couple because we were going to use urban bronze on my house, and we ended up using dovetail white on I believe the exterior of the house, and we used dovetail white, and we ended up using inkwell black on the gutters, and it turned out great. And I know urban bronze, I've seen that color painted, and it's a beautiful color too. So that's kind of the nice part is Sherwin-Williams has these classic colors that are their really popular sellers, and those are always ones you really can't lose with.
yeah, for sure. So are you a very big fan of opening up a project if you have the main living area kind of divided with a wall in the kitchen and it's kind of an old galley style kitchen? Are you pretty much like we're going to take that wall out every time, or do you have a preference on that?
Yeah, open concept is still popular. So if we can and it makes sense in terms of the budget, and we would decide that in the beginning if we're going to do that, then yeah, we will try to do so. Just because having that open space is really nice to have. We did a high end flip on Kimberly, and it was probably about a 15 to 20 foot dividing wall. We ended up getting in a galley style kitchen, but it had this dining room and this living area that were all compartmentalized because of that. And it was a very difficult project. We had to bring in a huge structural glue lam beam. We had to get it all engineered to do. But once we did, it completely opened up what was otherwise a confined kitchen, piecemeal dining area space to this just grand open vaulted area location. And it looked fantastic.
Nice. And then you popped in a little island with the Vina hood over it and went all stainless steel with it.
Yeah. And where it is sometimes just with a property type, you're not going to be able to do that, right? If you're looking at a ranch style house, 1950s, 1970s with a galley kitchen, and you're going to have to bring a glue lam header and you don't want to put a post in, then you're going to have to do some pretty technical things to open up that space. So it really is case by case.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times you can get away with the peninsula that has the beam right there. And as long as it's kind of built into the kitchen in a functional way, you still get the same effects. So, what advice would you give a client that's interested in flipping a house? You just mentioned 1950s homes and construction. Is there like an age bracket where you kind of stop looking at houses? You talked about opening up walls and finding stuff that you weren't expecting. Do you try to purchase at a certain age of home, or are you open to multiple ages?
We're open to any age. Really, it just depends on the price we're acquiring the property at, and that then comes down to condition and other variables. So, yeah, we're open to any age house in the area. So I'd say you'd be fine there. It really comes down to the numbers and how it all works out, and really knowing your numbers and being realistic about the numbers. That's the biggest thing. You're never going to know fully because you don't know exactly what the market is always doing, but being realistic, that's very smart because unfortunately, flipping especially, there is a lot of emotion attached to it from a national perspective, right? You have these companies out there, and I don't want to say the word guru because not everybody's like that, but when you look at a lot of the educators out there, their industry, they make about a 70% profit margin on educating people. That's where they make their money. Now, are you going to have that success in flipping a property? Who knows? Because yeah, they're saying they want you to do that. And it's going to be this, that, and the other, but they're making their money off of educating you on buying these properties. And it's a very profitable business to do. What we also have as well is things like HGTV. We have a lot of television and other mediums that really push house flipping, which is not a bad thing, but in my opinion, they promote it in a way to make it seem way easier and home run than what it is. What happens typically is you will have somebody who maybe goes to a convention and then they get a property. They didn't actually run the numbers on it. They're just really excited. They get into it. They lose their shorts. They are out. They are done. But there is a large populace that is ready to come in right behind them. So that's the big part, is just like really thinking about, okay, how can I come into this situation and create leverage and insulate myself? And then also, and then also get someone connected with someone like yourself, right? An advisor who has actually done this and been through it, not necessarily just taking a course. And that would be my place of, suggestion for somebody getting into it.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Good suggestion. I just helped my first time house flipper, and we did really well on it. But he decided to move into it, so I don't actually can't give you a final number on how well he did on the flip. Are there any things you mentioned insulating yourself? Like if you have a new client that's really romanticizing the idea of a flip, what's kind of like the first step that you would give them to kind of start getting them thinking in the right direction and educating them on flipping a house?
So if they're flipping a house, starting out thinking about what is your buy box? What is the criteria that you're really looking for? And I think a lot of people don't think about that. They're like, well, I want to make money. Like, okay, like, but what criteria are you going after? Because there's a lot of options out there. So unless you narrow it down, then you're always going to be looking around and you're never going to find anything. And you're never going to be focused enough to, when you do find something, to where you're really reducing the risk that you have into it. And so what I recommend to people is narrow down your buy box, specifically what it is you want to go after, and then think about what strategy do you want to apply. Do you want to buy this property as a personal residence, live in it for a couple years as you fix it up and then sell it, or rent it out and go do that again? Do you want to do it as you're a contractor? You want to go in there, fix it up yourself, hammer out, put it back on the market. So thinking about what is then your strategy, and then a big part is going to be relationships. So do you have someone like yourself who can advise, who's actually been through this? Because that person is going to be honest and straightforward with you, having been through it. That is going to save you a tremendous amount of time and money on projects. So having a proper advisor is really good. And then having proper relationships, is that advisor going to recommend subs to you that they've built? Like, can you leverage that situation? And that the advisor you're working with, the subs that they built relationships with over the years. That's then something that you could use. Or you trying to go out and build relationships with subs vendors. And when I say subs, I'm talking about painters. I'm talking about flooring, those various things that you may not have the skill set to appropriately do yourself. So and then the big part overarching is just trying to be realistic. Like, great, I want to come in and flip. Like, okay, what's your buy box? What's your strategy? Really think about those things, because that's going to help focus in on the rest of the process. And then knowing your numbers is always really good to do. Like I said, there's a ton of whoever maybe your advisor is. When I say advisor, I mean your realtor who has experience going through these projects. They may already have a template that has been refined that you can see and go over these numbers and really try to get a ballpark of what these costs are going to be, what the potential resale value is, and what that spread would look like in a situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And another big player in all of this is cash versus private money. A lot of people that are cash buyers, it may not hurt them as much to hold the property or maybe rent it out for a few years, let it appreciate, and then go in and do the remodel. But with private money, you're looking at, people talk about today's rates being high. Well, private money is even quite a bit higher. So if you are doing the private money, you could have really high monthly payments as part of your holding cost, and time literally is money in those projects.
Yeah, definitely. And that's part of, you hear on these educational classes, they'll like, go figure out, find the deal and the money will come. Well, maybe that deal pencils if it's cash. And then you don't have an option to get cash, because if you want to go find a partner in it, they want a return out of whatever it is you're trying to do. So I think I'm really glad that you mentioned hard money and alternative forms of financing, because there's ways that if you did an owner carry, maybe there's some ways you can work that out. But if you do an owner carry, whatever return is that owner is offering you, they got to beat the return of the bank, or they got to beat the return of hard money, because then it's not worth doing the owner carry in that situation. So financing is a piece of the puzzle that often gets overlooked, and it can become dangerous if you are more leveraged in that financing that you're taking on. If you're taking on short-term debt and that property is not moving, or you thought it was going to be a 3-month project and it's turned into a 9-month project, that's continuing to add up. So that's a big, big part.
Yeah, that is huge. That could be a $20,000 to $40,000 difference depending on the situation. So I guess let's talk a little bit about mistakes that you've seen in the past. Obviously, you're a realtor, so you probably have gone through a lot of flips, for customers or just for yourself. What are mistakes that you're seeing out there that first time or flippers are making in general?
Yeah, I'll just speak from experience, and part of it is having the emotional connection to a
Right.
property. There, it is very. I heard one investor say, investing in real estate is just a mathematical equation. That's it. If you have everything lined up appropriately and your numbers right and it makes sense, great. That's true, but I also feel as though you are just taking somewhat of a level of leap of faith when you get into a project, because you just don't know what's going to go on. And so having an emotional attachment to something, especially from the get-go, that is going to blur the logical side of things. And so that's a mistake that we have made before. Example being, we get into a property, we think it's no problem, so maybe we sped through the due diligence period. We're like, oh, this is great. And then all of a sudden you see a piece of dry rot and you start opening that up, and now you have to replace an entire wall because there's a little part in the roof that leaked over years and years and years, and you missed that before. And so that's going to be a big part of the mistake. The other part is not staying in your lane. We've had issues where we've gotten properties that look great. We did the due diligence. We did a well test, all checked out fine. And then we go to put in the equipment for that well, and we look at it and we're like, this well was, once we get the well, installer in there, he's like, this was like an illegally punched well. I don't want to say illegally punched, but it was just not done right. Like, it was grandfathered in, but you have to replace this whole thing. Like, that's something we're not expecting. We did the due diligence, but we weren't enough in our lane. And sometimes there are just these unknowns that can come up. So those are a couple big ones, is applying the emotional attachment to it, and then also not being focused enough by entering into those two areas, which is easy to do. You're definitely expanding on your risk.
So how often do you get professional inspections, or do you have an inspection period whenever you buy most of your properties, or is your brother as a contractor confident enough with his eye to kind of go through a property once and give the green thumb?
We always get a professional inspection, whether it's written or it's verbal. We're always going to get a third party to come in and have a look. And the reason why is because they always have their checklists, their checks and balances when they go through. And my brother in his profession stays in his lane. He's the contractor. I stay in my lane. I'm the real estate guy. And so we really try to be good about that, is let the specialists do their thing for the individual role.
Sure. Yeah, I've had a couple of clients make this same mistake, once with me and once before me, but we've also had a few properties live a little bit longer in the market just because it's on a busier road. Have you ever tried to tackle a busy road project, or do you pretty much just stay clear of those?
Yeah, we'll take them on, but that is something where we do account for
A significant discount.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. In the offer.
Yeah, for sure. That makes a lot of sense.
Another one too with that, Vince, is what I've noticed just as a realtor, where it can be harder to sell a property, even if it's a listing, could be a house close to a freeway. But the house, you go there and you can't hear a sound because there's this massive sound barrier concrete wall. Doesn't matter. The buyers are looking on Google Images, or they're looking on Zillow on a satellite view, and not always the case, but they're looking down of, oh, that's the freeway right next to you. They don't understand. So you got to get really creative to try to showcase to buyers, hey, this is actually a great opportunity because you're already going to be getting a better deal on the value of this. And it doesn't actually impact the property. It's something that is, I don't want to say it's illusion, but it's just skewed because of how they go to view the property to begin with. Because like 96% of buyers are looking online first.
Yeah, I'll usually, especially if a fixer has come on the market, just go visit it, even if I don't have a specific buyer. Like, kind of just want to have that information in my back pocket for any potential buyers that I might have in my pocket that I'm not, fully focused on at the moment. So it's definitely good to get in a lot of houses and get a feel for them. I think that's a high value for your clients. What about, aesthetic issues that you've seen, like mistakes that people have made on fixers? Like, I know we hear the term lipstick on a hog a lot. Have you ever been inside of a flip and just been like, why did they do that?
Yeah, that happens more often than not. And when we started, Garrett and I started the company, Base Builders. The reason it's called Base is we wanted to have a strong foundation and we wanted to build a reputation on quality. And we've gotten deals because of that. We've had people call us because they're like, hey, I've got this project. We know you guys do a really good job. Can you come take a look at it? And so, because what happens in the industry, you're right. The majority of time that I've seen personally, they'll come in and they'll do it way quick. You're like, man, if you had just kind of added like 20% more to this and what you did, then you would have a better product that would sell for a higher value on a property. So yeah, we see that a lot, and it's unfortunate, but just a reality.
Yeah, one of my favorites is when somebody spends about $80K on a remodel, put on a new roof and get new cabinets, new countertops, new flooring, and then you see like the original fixture hanging from the dining room, or or all the fixtures of the house are the 1980s fixtures.
Yeah, or you swap out outlets, but you're only swapping out, you have these yellow outlets, which a lot of houses do, and then you're like, oh, I'm going to only swap out the plates. So you have a yellow outlet with a white plate. Like, those little things just don't make sense.
Yeah, you can go on wayfair.com and get a really awesome fixture for like around $200, $250. It'll make the house feel unique. I think that fixtures personally really make a house pop. It's kind of like the signature of the house. So go ahead, and if you're going to spend $10,000 on a roof, spend $200 on a fixture, and
yes,
and look for one that really fits the vibe of the house.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we've digested quite a bit here. We're getting towards the end of our time. If somebody wants to reach out to you about flipping houses, or even, I know we mentioned in the beginning that you have a coaching program that you've been helping newer agents get established in the business. If they want to reach out to you, what's the best way to do that?
Best way is going to be email. So that's my first name, Dustin, at cvghome.com. That's for Corbin Vollstedt Group. That's going to be the best way to get a hold of me.
Perfect. Well, I hope you all learned something today, and I just want to thank Dustin for coming on, and I'd like to thank House to Home Construction, our sponsor, and I'd also like to thank all of you for listening. Next month's guest is Amanda Beaumark from Cascade Title, and she's going to talk about landlord-tenant laws. Good night, and we'll see you next time.
If you have a question for the show, feel free to email us at eugenerealestatepodcast@gmail.com. If you would like to work with Vince Casey as a buyer or seller, please email him at vincecaseyrealestate@gmail.com. Be sure to mention this podcast with House to Home Construction to receive up to $500 off any roof bid from a competitor in writing.